Hello everyone, you're listening to the Earful Tower podcast. My name is Oliver G. I got a question for you. What is the soundtrack of Paris? Now you'll be forgiven for thinking it's the sound of the Seine River flowing, the sound of a crisp croissant getting bitten into, the sound of a espresso cup being put down on a saucer on a sprawling Paris cafe terrace. Yeah, sure, they're the sounds of Paris, but when it comes to the soundtrack, the music of Paris, there's a much more definite answer, and it has been captured by our house musician Press Maxson. Now, the past 20-25 episodes, you've heard his music, but did you know the behind-the-scenes story, how he chose the songs that fit with all the episodes, how he played all the instruments, and how he essentially made the music, the soundtrack of Paris for us to enjoy? That's what he's about to talk about. What you're going to hear right now was from a live recording we did online with Patreon members. It was followed by a half-hour Q&A session. If you want to see the replay of it, sign up on Patreon, patreon.com/The Earful Tower, where you can get a lot more bonuses, including all the PDF guides to the city. Otherwise, enjoy this episode. Press Maxson, he'll say at the end how you can follow him and get his music and his books. But as for me, I'll leave you with a little bit more music from the man himself. Let's get into it. Press Maxson, welcome to the studio.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It's funny to hear your voice on the show because usually we don't. Usually we hear your music. I know you've been a long-time listener. How does it feel to be sharing your voice with everybody?
It's wild. Honestly, it's a little wild. The first time I think we spoke on a phone, you and I have talked about this, but it was so strange hearing the voice that is in my ears when I'm jogging, learning about Paris, kind of wishing I was there, wishing I was jogging through Paris, then hearing that voice talking to me. I'm having a similar feeling right now.
I always love having people on the show who've listened to the show before because it's like a kind of, like it's, I don't know, it's like weird worlds meeting. I can say the same thing because I don't know how many people know how you and I found each other, but I'd become a fan of you. I don't think That's I told this story. Yeah, I don't think the story has come out on the Earful Tower yet, but for anyone who is interested how these kind of meetups work, I was scrolling through TikTok, which I never use. Especially at the time, had never used, and one of those videos came up where some guy was playing all the instruments to a song, and I always love those videos. I find people super talented who can do that kind of thing, and this guy was playing, if I remember correctly, that introduction music for the Chicago Bulls. And as a basketball fan, I remember going, wow, now this is cool. I think this dude was wearing a Michael Jordan jersey or something like that. Is it sounding pretty familiar to you so far?
oh yeah, I know that dude. Yeah,
yeah. So weirdly, because I got some maybe like you with your instruments. I think I've got a pretty good memory of people who've back and forth with me on the show, who've maybe become Patreon members, and I remember seeing the name being like Press Maxson rings a bell to me, and then with social media, I'd seen this dude's video. It got shown again, and I was like, hang on, this guy's in the Earful Tower world. And at the same point, I was needing a musician. And I think I sent you a message. I was like, hey, I love your stuff. I'm looking for someone who can do music. Can you play French stuff? Is that essentially how it went?
I think that's it. There was a little time, because you sent me that first message just saying, hey, I think I recognize your name. This is really cool. And then it was probably like 2 months later, I think, was when you sent the email saying, hey, and it was like you were in a bind, or you not in a bind, you just needed something turned around fast.
That's exactly it. And I think we were at it was 17th hour this month, and I was like, I need any kind of French song. Can you do it? I love what you did with the different instruments. And that is how the next 17 or 18 consecutive weeks and beyond of music for the Earful Tower happened. It turns out that Press is the matryoshka of music, to use Lena's words, and he has the talent of being able to play lots of instruments and mix them together to make a song. And what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about how you, firstly, how you contributed to this past season of work, but more intricately how Paris and music are connected. and how you managed to pick a song that spoke for every arrondissement. So we'll start on that question. When it comes to Paris and music, and I know you're a big fan of French musicians, but do you think the two go together especially well? And if so, how and why?
Yeah, I think the answer is an obvious yes. Paris has a really rich musical history. You go back, the stuff that's obvious to us is the jazz era of the 20s, but even now, if you take jazz out of the equation, I'm sure everybody here has done this. You walk down the streets of Paris and you see flyers for, concertos being performed in a church on a weekend, and smaller gigs. I've been to plenty of bars that have, a piano player in them or a little group on a patio or something. And some of that you get in America or other places around the globe. Some of that you don't. I mean, I don't see posters in my town for just, we're having an open concert full of, Schubert or something. I just don't see that kind of stuff. So I think Paris and music go together really well. As you said, I'm a huge fan. And really, some of the arrondissements were harder than the others, but it wasn't hard to find musical ties. It was a little harder finding the right musical ties for the show, but yeah, Paris and music are married.
And you're also a big fan, as I am, of Charles Aznavour, Edith Piaf. Do you have some kind of favorite that keeps you coming back?
I think really Trenet and Aznavour were my gateway. I can't remember if we ever talked about this. In one of the first conversations we had, Oliver, I felt like we really we hit on the Aznavour thing, and that was really something that made me feel like, wow, this is going to be really fun. This is going to be cool. We listened to the same stuff. But I was visiting my aunt and uncle in Brittany, out in Brittany, probably 20 years ago, and my aunt had a Charles Trenet CD on repeat the whole time. And that's kind of where I first kind of woke up. I was in my early 20s, and I woke up and I was like, well, that is gorgeous. And my uncle was like, well, if you love him, the yin to his yang is Aznavour. Trenet's this melodic, really well-dressed, perfect song guy, and Aznavour is he plays a character. He can be sarcastic. He can be a little mean. He can be really funny, and he sings his lyrics more than Trenet traditionally sings his lyrics. They're the perfect 1-2 punch. So those were the two that really got me going, and from there, from there I looked for tons of other artists, found many I loved, and yeah, those two are probably my favorite.
I want to talk a little bit about the way that you make the music, but first touching on what you said about those two Charleses, and I'm sure I'm going to get emails that I'm wrong about this, but I feel, just hearing you talk about it like that, I feel like Aznavour is a very 18th district kind of guy. We know he did the famous La Bohème song about Bohemian Montmartre, but I also feel like Trenet, the other Charles, is like a 7th arrondissement kind of dude. Very, this, everything is sort of neat and working and fancy. Do you think that's a fair district? Bring it into the arrondissement here. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
I absolutely understand the metaphor, and you're right. We're probably going to get a lot of emails for that. But I understand it. And I mean, you almost see that in the landscapes, the street layout in Montmartre is a little bit messier, and more complicated, more elevation and than it is maybe in the 7th, which is the shiniest, polished, the place where people, when they first think of Paris, for a lot of folks who especially haven't been there, that's the image that pops up as something in the 7th. So yeah, I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
I appreciate that, and that's good because we're going to talk about that in a second. But there's surely people listening thinking, who is this Press Maxon guy? Does he have the chops? How many instruments do you play? And how did it come to be that your musical talent manifested itself?
First of all, the answer to the question, does he have the chops? Probably not. I've got imposter syndrome pretty bad here. But
don't be ridiculous.
The Cliff's Notes version really is my parents were in a singing group in church, so I was always around music. My dad plays guitar. My grandfather was a big band trumpet leader in the 30s. So Music was all around, and just like every kid, I started playing piano when I was in second grade. I started playing trumpet in third grade. I picked up a guitar in fourth grade, and by then I discovered the Beatles. And so practicing guitar, I never practiced guitar a day in my life. I was just, when I was 10 years old, I was pretending I was a member of the Beatles. And I could not have been any good, but when I came home from school, that was my hobby, And so if you know how to play piano or guitar, this is to answer your question about how many instruments you play. That's how I got started, but those are sort of gateway instruments to other things. Like if you play piano, you understand the mechanics of other keyboarded instruments, organ or accordion. It does not make me an accordion player. It makes me someone who knows how to play accordion and understand the mechanics of it, but I'm still, I wouldn't say I've mastered it by any means. If you play guitar, you understand the mechanics of mandolin, banjo, bass guitar, anything stringed where, your right hand is doing the strumming or your dominant hand is doing the strumming and your left hand is doing fretboard work. So I think I can count how many instruments we played on the Eiffel Tower this year. The standard was piano, bass, guitar on probably every track. And there was stuff like electric piano, organ, like little things that were in there. Like we did play mandolin and banjo on different tracks. We played trombone and trumpet on different tracks. Tons of little auxiliary percussion, tambourine, sleigh bells, shaker on almost every track. I picked up a violin for one little, I can't even say I played it. I used it as a sound effect when I went back, which we can talk about later. I went back and did the 20th arrondissement, which I wasn't on originally, but I did an Edith Piaf song, so I used it in there. It was La Bohème. So yeah, that's, I don't know what I just counted to, like 8?
An awful lot. And before we get into those arrondissements, is the accordion as hard to play as it looks?
It's not easy. Yeah. The trick is, even though I understand the keyboard and I can play piano, that's my main instrument, it's a different sort of mechanism because you have to make it make sound. You can't just press the keys and it'll make sound. You have to be pulling in and out, drawing the air in and out. And that is kind of like rubbing your belly and tapping your head at the same time. It's something you have to learn how to do. And the buttons on the left hand, some accordions don't have the keyboard. That would be a foreign world to me, but they have buttons on both hands. The button on the left hand on mine, I understand them. I don't use them a lot, though, not only because I'm not very good at them, but they're ultra loud and they're super overpowering. So if I'm playing it to a track where I've also played guitar, piano, drums, like that kind of stuff, sometimes you just don't need that low end. It's too overbearing. You just want like a little part. You want something that's nuanced. So to answer your question, yeah.
I think it's cool that you explain all these different instruments that you played on this season, because as with everything, as we heard talking to Augusta about the photos, talking to Eddie about the videos, there's a lot more in this creative process going on than people think. I think typically people hear music in the background and think there's background music and don't realize that there's a guy in the States playing 8 different instruments to make it happen. But also, and this is going to be a bit of a focus for a second here, the songs that you and I chose, sometimes it was you, sometimes I sort of pushed something, and sometimes it was the two of us, that was often very conscious choices, trying to match an arrondissement of Paris with a song that already existed. Now, it might sound kind of sort of insane to try and match an arrondissement with a piece of music that already exists, but we had a system. From my perspective, there were some that I immediately knew because of what we do there. Like, I remember thinking, we're going to the 13th arrondissement and we're going to be staying on a hotel that's in a boat. We're going to be on the water. That calls for a song like La Mer by Charles Trenet. And when I said that, I remember you were like, yes, I'm Beautiful in. Song. That sounds great. Or I remember when we were in the 15th and we were going to be up really high. We were planning to be in one of those sort of hot air balloons. And I was like, there's a song that I really like, a modern song about the wind, Le Vent nous portera. And I was like, can you do that one? Or like La Bohème in the 18th. Those kind of songs were really obvious. Mm-hmm. Often it wasn't obvious. And I was like, Press, what do you got? and you were like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I don't even know." How did you come up with ideas of songs, and how did you make them match?
I think there was really 2 tracks, but by the time we got through the teens, by the time we get down to 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I was thinking, okay, there are artists I want to include, and I thought that if I'm doing a top 20 music of Paris, how do you do that without putting Jacques Dutronc in there or one of my modern favorites, Zaz? And I was like, how do I find a spot? So part of it was like I looked through some of my favorite artists and looked for songs that might fit something you said you'd do, or if we didn't know that, something that maybe, Jardin du Luxembourg, like that was 6th, right? In the 6th, finding a song about a garden, and if I couldn't find that within my favorite artists, I'd just start like kind of researching. I'd start looking up artists who were born in the arrondissement, or maybe artists who had died and were buried there. Was always sort of an option. I'd look at some of the marquee stops that I was predicting you'd probably go to and look for songs about those. And there are a lot of songs about Paris, but as I kind of mentioned earlier, they're not all really right to then translate. Like there's a ton of techno songs. I was like, well, I'm not going to like translate a techno song. So there was a little bit of a process, but I think we found a really great crop of tunes.
I think so too. And something we'll talk about later is how we're going to make it into a CD. But I want to get a little bit nerdy here. You took it to the next level, and I remember when I sort of presented them to Lena, who is my wife and who was the co-host. I never read what you'd written until we started the episode, and it was always quite a surprise for her, and even for me reading the emails. That like I remember in the 7th. Maybe it's better that you explain this so I don't get it wrong, but the way you incorporated our name into it, where did these ideas come from? And explain that 7th to us for those of us who have forgotten.
Well, so the 7th was one of my favorites. Eddie mentioned it 2 weeks ago because the video version had this like great moment where you kind of the shot came around the corner of a hedge with the Thinker, Rodin's Thinker right there. And the Rodin Museum is absolutely one of my favorite places in Paris to go. I mean, so many folks love that, and I'm one of them. So it kind of, that one, I knew you were going there, and that one was special to me. But in a nutshell, we started that track with an arpeggiated 7th chord on the piano, just kind of as a funny little nod. Then we began it with that little, it's like a 10-second long song from the movie Paris When It Sizzles by Frank Sinatra. One of 2 Americans, I think only 2 American artists I counted in the whole Paris countdown. That's one instance. Then La Tour Eiffel est toujours là, the song by Mestinguet. But then after that, kind of just did a little enharmonic spelling, as they call it. Like, so, the alphabet on a piano keyboard in Western music is A through G, and then after you get to a G, you go back to an A. And so I thought, well, what's nice about that is your last name, G-E-E, is all within the spelling on a keyboard. So I kind of wrote up a little chord progression that went G major 7, then E minor 7 9, and then another E minor 7 9. So the name G-E-E is baked right in there. And what was cool about it was that actually synced up, that part of the music synced up in the video to the family picnic in the park at Rodin, at the Musée Rodin. And so it was kind of like, oh boy, it's like their theme, and there they are. So that was one of those like really cool
it's moments. Funny. It's funny because we're getting thumbs up from the live audience now from several people, which means either people appreciate it, or maybe people heard it when they were watching or listening and going, oh yeah, that's G-E-E spelled out, which leads me to my next question. I'm not a music expert, but is it possible for other music experts to have been listening going, oh yeah, that's spelled out G-E-E, or is that absolutely impossible?
I mean, someone would have to really be really listening to catch it. I mean, I don't have perfect pitch, so when I hear music, I don't automatically go, oh, that's a G, that's an E, that's an E. But I have really good relative pitch. So sometimes I'll listen to a song, and just because of the way guitar chords or piano chords are voiced, like especially on guitar chords, you're like, oh, I recognize that chord, that's a G, and I can hear, because of relative pitch, I can hear, okay, that's the tonic of the song. So from there, I could absolutely pick out a G, an E, and an E. But it's like, it's harder to do that, I think, in jazz music for me, because there are so many other tones in there that are outside the traditional major scale. There's, flatted fifths, there's flatted sevenths, the list goes on. So, but to answer your question, yeah, if someone was really, to use our phrase, eagle-eared, they could do it.
Let's bring it back to Paris for a second. Are there songs, like famous songs about Paris that you didn't use at all that you regret not using, that people should listen to?
Yeah, what a great question. I actually think we hit most of like my greatest hit all-time faves. And I mean, that was obviously intentional. I didn't know whether I'd be sort of invited to do this beyond the season or not, so I thought I'm putting everything in there while I can. There were a couple songs that were not necessarily about Paris, but I thought at several points, boy, this would be such a great one that might fit the vibe, but I can't find how it would be relevant to this arrondissement, so I'll just put it on the back burner. But I will say, for all listening at home, for all listening in our audience today, I'm like 3 songs away. I'm going to put a Spotify playlist up, and I'll put it in our members only group on Facebook of the original versions of all the songs we used. And so you can hear them from the original artists and hopefully recognize them. But look for that today or tomorrow. That's sort of a side gift.
Oh, wow. That's very kind of you to do that. And that leads on to the question that answers so many emails from listeners. The idea that Prez and I have been working on behind the scenes is to put his original recordings onto an old school, remember these old school CDs, to send out as gifts to all the Patreon members in time for Christmas. That's our plan. It kind of feels fun to make an old school CD. I don't know if people still know how to play them these days. We're getting more thumbs up from the audience. That's great. But that's our idea, with show notes explaining everything. But I want to end this podcast episode, Press, by something I didn't prepare you for, but maybe I know you've been watching the other ones, so you maybe knew it was coming. In terms of music, which were the 3 arrondissements that you liked working on the best in order from 3, 2, 1?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I did predict this question a little bit, but I didn't prepare an answer. I should have thought it through more. I mean, the ones that jump out for me are the ones that worked really well with video. I think Augusta, she cheated and gave 4 answers, right?
She did. You can't get away with that as well.
Okay. Okay, fine.
You can try.
All right. Well, we mentioned the 7th, although that's not the 3rd. I've got to rank them, right? The 7th will be my 2nd. We already talked through that one, but that one, it worked really well. I approached that one thinking it was special because you also lived there, and I thought maybe I should not be more attentive to it, but just try and do something. The 5th, I feel like, was one that kind of it was personally fun for me because I was checking a lot of boxes on favorite artists and favorite songs. But at the same time, that one had a meandering little storyline that wasn't perfectly tied to the arrondissement. And I think that kind of actually makes it charming. But I think the music to that one went really well. I know I can't do 4. The 6th, I love the track for the 6th, but my favorite overall is probably the 1st, just because I know that we didn't do a grand finale kind of big episode. It was just like all the other episodes, but for me, I had it in the back of my mind that this is the musical finale, from the last 20 arrondissements. So that one was pretty fun to make, and I really was like, who are the legends? Who's on the Mount Rushmore of French music? And I tried to put those in the 1st.
That was awesome. And anyone who is casually listening to this podcast, go and check out on YouTube where you can hear the majority of all the songs that Press made for each of the arrondissements. Otherwise, check out on patreon.com/The Earful Tower, where we will be sending CDs in time for Christmas. We're going to hang around for a Q&A with the live audience press, but thank you so much for being on this podcast episode, and thank you even more for the magnificent musical masterpieces that you sent our way for the past season. It was hugely appreciated, not just by me, but and not just by all the people who are clapping on this Zoom chat, but all the listeners around the world. So thank you so much, and thanks for being on the show.
Well, may I say thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to the Earful fans. The audience has been nothing but kind to me. I've been really... it's been really fun connecting with you on social media. You can find me on Instagram at PressMaxon, it's just my name. I'm always happy to talk to any of you in the Earful Tower, members club as well. I'm also an author. You can find my books. Some of them are set in Paris as well, over on Amazon.com. And it has been such a pleasure making music, Oliver, with you and with Lena as well, and being a part of Earful. So I'm just as grateful as you are. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. And all those links will be in the show notes of the podcast, and that will round out the end of this podcast chat. Thank you. And that's it for this week. If you want to see the replay of that whole chat, see everybody's smiling faces, and listen to the Q&A afterwards on video, it's uploaded already on patreon.com/The Earful Tower. One of the perks you get for supporting this podcast for $10 a month, or more if you want more bonuses. I'm going to leave you with that, and with a little bit more music from Press. Thanks so much for listening and for following along the Earful Tower. If you're in Australia, remember, we're coming down in October. Get in touch if you want to know more. East Coast, the whole month of October. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys then while we talk about our new book and our life in Paris. Take it away, Press.